The gate of grace, or disgrace, the gate of openness, or being closed, the right angle cross of rulership, the 22, the 47, the 26, the 45. How to provoke social openness or not. The 22nd gate is a gate of attentiveness. That is, it is a gate of the left ear. All individuality is acoustic in nature. The right ear, the 57th gate, operates in the now through the whole intuitive process, hearing in the now. And the left ear operates through the emotional system and its wave. You know, you get a telephone call and you put it to the left ear and you don't get all the information during the time of the call. That is, you don't have conscious access or recognize all the information at once. What that does mean is that you hear what you want to hear depending on where you are in the wave. And then the next day you may hear what you didn't want to hear, or you may hear more of what you like to hear, because suddenly it comes back to you. If you put it to your right ear, you hear everything in the now, compressed. So the 22nd gate is a gate of attentiveness, but it's a gate of attentiveness that operates best over time, and that's why that this stream of emoting in the individual process is rooted to what we call romance. We saw through the 39 and its teasing and the 55 and its fickleness that there is a building of passion that works in the individual process that cannot operate if there is early consummation. In other words, in order for individuality to achieve what is called romance, there has to be a wave building passion. And the passion is based on what you don't get, not what you get. The individual process is inherently melancholic, which means that all aspects of individuality operate in a chemistry between sadness, which is a creative environment, and happiness, which is an external productive environment. So here you have a gate that is both individual and melancholic and emotional at the same time. And this is the gate that has to create the friendship field essential for an individual to be able to confront either the tribe or the collective as a stranger and to mutate them. Grace. There is no way that the individual can have impact on society when it's on the terms of society. That the impact of the individual cannot be controlled by a timetable. That the power of the individual to mutate is inherently dependent on where they are in their melancholic cycle and where they are in their emotional field. When you are sad and you are down, and the individual who is emotional, these things are harmonized. When you're sad and you're down, this is a time to be creative. This is a time to be involved in your own process without influence, without somebody there to try to bring you up and make you happy. Just to be allowed to be creative. And then in that moment where the mood shifts and the wave shifts, that's the time to go physically out into the world. That happy emotional condition on the outside is what grace is. It allows the freak, it allows the individual to have the emotional field that permits openness for the collective and the tribe. They're taken in by it. They're taken in to the romance. A quality of behavior best suited in handling mundane and trivial situations. I love that heading. That's what rulership is all about. The mundane and the trivial. And that's what we live by. First line, second class ticket. First line, second class ticket. That's a foundation of grace. You see, the 22nd gate is the gate of attentiveness. Imagine you have a romantic couple. You got the 12 and you have the 22. The 12 is talking. They're sitting at, one of these little cafe tables. They're very close. Their eyes are locked. There's a tone of voice that is a kind of soft murmur. It doesn't matter what the hell is going on around them. They're totally oblivious to that. And one of them is talking, and the other one is totally attentive, taking it all in. And they take turns at that. Now that's the grace mechanism at work. This absorption of the other. Remember, it's very acoustic. If you want to have a love affair with an individual, you're going to have to sweet talk them. Because words matter to them. And tone of voice matters even more. And if you have the right tone of voice, it will help you no matter what you say. Keep that in mind. I really think you're a jerk. It helps. You'll see. The ability to accept and enjoy a subordinate position. The emotional awareness to enjoy a subordinate position. Subordinate position. The whole thing is that the freak is always the outsider. The moment the individual claims a first-class ticket, they're going to throw them off the train. You just can't do that as an outsider. So you have to come in like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, that's what it's all about. You come in and then you rip the mask off and you mutate them. That's how it works. Mars and detriment, the inevitable humiliation that comes with claiming a first-class ticket with a first-class seat with a second-class ticket, where the emotional energy challenges the awareness and can result in social humiliation. You see, the moment that the emotional system is not exactly in its right position, its right wave environment, its right happiness environment, the individual is instantaneously rejected. Over. They are different. Neither the collective nor the tribe wants particularly to have to deal with the individual. You wouldn't want your daughter to marry one. Because they're not like you. They're different. So the only way that they get access to you is when the environment and the timing is correct. And remember, timing is being yourself. Entering in according to your type and your definition and authority. And remember something, we're dealing with the lower trigram here. It doesn't mean like this first line knows there's a 12 at the other end. It doesn't. The second line, charm school. The belief that style can mask nature. All individuals have to learn this game. They just must. When I have a life in which I have crossed endless borders. And I mean, how I look when I go across those borders, you wouldn't recognize me. Yeah. If you're a freak, you mask it and you survive. And what this says about the 22 is that they're in hiding so that they'll be left alone as an individual. And that they won't have to deal with the terms of everybody else and their comments. On the other side of this in the 12-2, you have rigorous withdrawal, you have purification, stay away from negative forces. This is the only opportunity the individual has to be mutative, and they have to be very careful. So you have to fool the collective and the tribe style. The ability to successfully delude oneself and others. The possibility to attract others with an emotional style. And of course, this is quite natural for them. And everybody sees it. They look in and they, individuals by their very nature attract attention. And of course, often that attention is not welcome. You're the different ones. So that can be negative or positive. They're always attracting attention. So you look in their window and say, they look interesting, whatever the case may be. Jupiter in detriment, the legalization of form over substance, where the style is energized at the expense of awareness or clarity. Now, of course, it is one thing to develop a style as an individual, because it can help mask your difference. But at the same time, what often happens is that it simply becomes a permanent mask, and the jumping out of the closet doesn't take place. You don't jump out and scream, here I am to mutate you. It doesn't happen. The third line, the enchanter. This is one of those great places for the third line. I have a description of individuality. I call that being a stranger of consequence in terms of the relationship of the individual to the collective or the tribe. A stranger of consequence steps into your life, whatever those circumstances are, as themselves, empowers you in any way that is their nature, and then goes away. Individuals have less and less and less power the longer you keep them in your aura. Familiarity breeds contempt. So here in the third line, because the third line is about bonds made and broken, it is about the natural ability of the third line here. Here's where they really are an enchanter, because that's how it works. In this channel is the history of unrequited love. You catch one glimpse of somebody and you write poetry for 60 years about them and never see them again. That bond is broken, but the magic is left behind, because you see, the individual magic, passion in the individual is strongest before the fall. That is, before the consummation. And if there's no consummation, the passion lasts forever. This is the magic of it. That's the risk, is the consummation. Remember I told you about individuals? Before you make love to an individual, or before as an individual you make love to anybody else, listen to their music. If you don't like the first thing you hear them put on, you know right away they're going to be lousy lovers, they're going to be lousy friends, lousy partners. It is not going to work. Everything about the individual is acoustic. If the vibration isn't right, nothing else is going to be right. Perfected grace. Saturn, exalted form, is a definition and actualization of substance. The possibility for perfected openness through the alignment of emotional energy and awareness. To know exactly the right moment to break it. That couple sitting with each other in that little cafe and they're so intense in each other's face. If one of them says, look, I have to go now, I'll see you tomorrow. Wow, does that generate heat. But the moment it's your place or my place, the passion is about to start dying. Even if the sex is good. By the way, if the sex isn't good, the relationship will end. This is the whole thing about individuality. Individual is very quirky. You can have an incredible passion about somebody and finally get to the point of consummation only to discover that it's really not what you wanted. And of course, being individual, it's not going to change. So it's one of those things to understand about the individual process, that it's better to walk away and build the passion than it is necessarily to have the consummation. And this is where the perfected grace is. They leave behind a wonderful reputation. You know, they pump you up, they give you this heat rush, and then they disappear. And it's like, well, you know, I remember I had this meeting, blah, 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 blah. And you have enormous impact on them. It goes deep. This is not about penetrating. Mars and detriment, unconscious grace, and innate openness, same thing. It's just that you're not really participating in it, which means that there can be some psychic dilemma if you're caught up in your head. In other words, you wonder why you didn't continue what was exciting in that sense, or the passion in that, and all of a sudden you've broken it off and away you've gone. That's just the nature of the third line. However, in both cases, whether the exalted or the detriment, you leave behind a reputation, that is, you leave behind a wave that has very, very powerful impact. By the way, the greater the impact, of course, is the closer you are to your nature. You know, obviously that impact lessens if you're not clear, if the not self is running your life, if you're just being conditioned. The upper trigram. Here, obviously, is the beginning of the individual potential to really be able to mutate the other through social interaction. You know, I started human design, I started it with a 22 partner. I'm a 12. You know, to be able to have literally the energy, the individual energy, the social energy necessary to attract both the collective and the tribe. The upper trigram is transpersonal, therefore it understands that there's a 12th gate at the other end. It really recognizes that grace can manifest. In our discussions of looking at lines, looking at channels, one of the things I've suggested to you is that you look at channels in terms of their type, and that there are only 4 channels that are manifesting channels, and this is one of them. And of course, this is an emotional manifesting channel. In other words, the moment that you get to the 4th line understands, knows, in the sense of individuality, its power. And they're very different because of that. They know their power because they know that they can manifest that style, manifest that social grace, and get access to articulation, the 12th gate, to be able to speak to be able to interact with the other. Sensitivity. And remember what happens in 4th lines, because they are lines of friendship, brotherhood, sisterhood, that they're always going to be very concerned about the other, much more concerned about the other than the essence of what they're transferring to them. The modification of behavior to enrich interactions. I mean, this is the only place where you find phoniness in the individual process. In other words, this is where the individual is very sensitive to its own individuality and difference, and has various ways of trying to mask that. You know, I'm different, but I'm just like you. You know, don't hurt me. Neptune exalted, a mediumistic simplicity that rejects elaborate rituals, the possibility of social openness through the rejection of formality. In other words, the moment that you see the other, you've got to modify your style. The style that you used in the lower trigram when you didn't know the other has to change in order for you to work successfully with the other. So this is a modification of behavior. You know, you're really, changing the way that you act in order not to be suspicious and recognized immediately as a potential threat. Mars in detriment, an over-reliance on the mechanics of style that can abort potentially significant relationships. The limitation of social openness through the need for formality. Now, of course, this is something that's very common amongst individuals, is that they feel that the only way they can really meet strangers is in a formal way. In other words, that, you can meet somebody if you've been invited to a party, which is formal. Doesn't mean you have to dress formal. It's a party. You've been invited. The people that you don't know at that party, they're okay for you to meet. But to just go up and meet them on the street is not something which this detriment can really do. It's just very difficult for it. And it's funny for me because I have the 12-1, and I am only really good socially in formal situations. In other words, I can be relatively social, subjectively social with you in a formal situation, but I'm much more uncomfortable when that becomes a personal situation. This is classic for the individual. Now, given the exalted here is a gift of being able to externalize in any situation in that sense, not necessarily needing the formal protection, that comes when an individual tries to mutate the other. The last 7 minutes and 30 seconds of the fourth line, we have the change to the juxtaposition cross. The 45-26 is replaced by the 12 and the 11. Remember that the moment that you have the 12 and the 11 together, that you're always dealing with education. And that here when you come into this cross, the 12-22 is a definition. So here both in the juxtaposition cross and in the left angle, you have a 12-22 definition. By the way, the 12-1 to the 22-4 in the case of the juxtaposition cross. You have the 22, the 47, the 11, and the 12. And this is the juxtaposition cross of grace. These are very, very unique individuals who have easy transpersonal skills. And they recognize how uncommon juxtaposition is. It only represents 7 minutes and 30 seconds of arc in the whole hexagram, which is over 5 degrees. So please recognize that there are not a lot of these people that walk around in the world. Whereas if you look at any line, you might be dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions. When you're dealing with juxtaposition crosses, they're going to be a very, very small minority in the whole. Very small minority in the whole. The left angle cross is the cross of informing. To bring into form. And this cross will bring the 55-6 mutation into form. And it will bring that mutation to others, and it will articulate that mutation. The 12-22 is a very interesting channel because biologically it represents the inside of you that's outside. In other words, if you go into your mouth and you go down your throat into the esophagus and down into the stomach and into the intestinal system, that's actually outside, that's inside. I mean, it's folded inward. That's how we evolve out of a cell. It isn't really, when you put food into your mouth, it's actually never going inside of you. It's going into the folded you. But it's not going into an inside part at all. It's still on the outside, and only through chemistry and many other factors do you then take the information into your actual body. This is the place where you have air, and this is the place where you have all kinds of breath problems, because breathing is conditioned by the 12th gate and the mutations that have taken place in the 12th gate over our 4 million years plus evolution as humans. So the left angle cross of informing, the fifth line is directness, the disregard of form when required. Now, of course, this is the magic of all fifth lines. The magic of a fifth line is to know precisely when to be social. And knowing that to be social in that moment is that when everyone else is weak, because it's a moment of crisis, and in that moment of crisis, that weakness dictates into their potential openness. And then they have their chance to fulfill the projection of the other. the power inherent in higher principles to successfully transgress behavioral codes, the possibility through emotional awareness to behave individualistic in social interaction. In other words, if you've got the gift and it's the right time, you can be yourself in that situation. And they won't be upset with you because they know when you're finished, you're going to go away. And that's so important. They don't realize how much they want you to go away when it's over. And finally, here we get to the sixth line. The sixth line, of course, is the mutative line. That is the mutation that is coming for us, a general mutation that will take place through the sixth line. And we know already the nature of sixth lines, how they early in their life will play out the enchanter, cranking people up and disappearing, and learning to see that that's not very effective for them, and that there must be something else to all of that. And you get to this line of maturity, and it is the alignment with experience of form with substance. That it's not just about what most individuals seek, is that to find a safe enough mask that they're not threatened. Not simply to find a mask so that they can have their opportunity to mutate the substance. Not just learning how to deal with the other. And remember, the whole emphasis of this channel is learning how to deal with the other, which the individual is just simply not good at. Not designed to be good at, because they're designed not to be influenced. So what happens here throughout the hexagram is that there is a tendency to overcompensate for the other. And of course, this can end up being just simply finding a way to hide from the other, so they don't know that you're different. The Sun exalted, natural and evident leadership and authority, the possibility that experience in social interaction will result in a leadership capacity. The maturity that can come from recognizing that it's not simply learning how to deal socially, but that there is then the responsibility of using that to be mutative, to impact, to be the leader, to change the very nature of what we are. The detriment, the Mars, the alignment tends to express itself in nonconformist modes. That is, the possibility that experience in social interaction will result in a nonconformist expression of openness. You see, if you finally get to the end of the process as an individual and you realize that your mutation is truly of value, then you can allow yourself to drop the mask and just be the freak. Now, of course, that's quite a step to get to that point. Somebody like me, I walk through the streets like this, I'm a target. You're just a target. Fortunately, I'm not a 22-6. That's not my trip, But it's something to understand that the individual can finally get to that point where it can drop its need for protection from the collective or from the tribe. The nature of mutation, that once you have the capacity to mutate the other as an individual, and in our process of going through the wheel, we come finally here to the 36th gate, the darkening of the light, the gate of crisis, the gate of inexperience, to bring that mutation directly into the human experience and the human experiential way. In order for mutation to become part of the totality, it must become part of the totality's experience. And this movement from the 22 to the 36, they're beside each other in the solar plex system. They are both the emotional gates of manifesting channels. They're very similar to each other. The irony is that what becomes part of the human experience can never become a part of it in any way that's aware. That when it jumps into the 36, it just jumps into the experience, and only history will be able to evaluate the ultimate advantage or disadvantage of the mutation. You know, we have both positive and negative mutations that are always at work, whether at the biological level or at the social interactive level.